Hello, my friend. Welcome to your surgery story. My name is Dr. Mike, and it's my privilege to be the voice that guides you through tonight's extraordinary surgery as you drift to sleep. Over the years, I've stood in many operating rooms, felt the weight of many decisions, seen outcomes both expected and surprising. But tonight, I'm going to share something different with you, something that happened on a winter evening when the ordinary rules seemed to bend just slightly. Before you drift off, make sure you've subscribed to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Because trust me, we've got some fascinating cases ahead. Now settle in, let the day fall away, and join me in the operating room for what might be the most unusual cesarean section I've ever performed. The call came through just after 11 at night. I was finishing paperwork in the attending lounge, the hospital quiet around me in that particular way it gets during the late shift. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago. Outside the window, snow was beginning to fall, fine and steady, blanketing the parking lot in white. My pager buzzed. Labor and delivery. Stat. The message was brief, clinical, but something in the wording made me pause. Patient in active labor, complicated presentation, requesting surgical consult immediately. I grabbed my coat and headed for the stairs, taking them two at a time, my mind already running through possibilities. Breech presentation, placenta previa, fetal distress, the usual complications that brought me to the delivery floor in the middle of the night. But when I pushed through the double doors into the obstetrics wing, the atmosphere felt different. The nurses at the station looked up at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Not panic exactly, something closer to uncertainty. One of them, Janet, a veteran who'd seen everything in her 30 years on the floor, gestured toward room 4. "She's been asking for you specifically," Janet said quietly. Her accent is unusual. "We've been having some communication difficulties." I nodded, washing my hands at the nearby sink, the soap dispenser clicking in the silence. Through the partially open door of room 4, I could hear a low sound, not quite a moan, something more melodic, rising and falling like a tide. I dried my hands and stepped inside. The room was dimmed, just the monitor lights glowing green and red in the darkness. And there, on the bed, was my patient. She was humanoid in shape, which was the first thing I noticed. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. But the details were where the familiar ended and something else began. Her skin had a faint luminescence to it, a pale, silvery quality that seemed to gather what little light there was and reflect it back softly. Her hair, if you could call it that, was long and white, almost translucent, flowing down past her shoulders. But it was her eyes that held my attention. 5 of them. 3 arranged in a horizontal line across where a human's eyes would be, and 2 more positioned slightly higher on her forehead, forming a gentle arc. Each one was large, dark, and liquid, reflecting the monitor lights like pools of still water. They blinked in a slow, deliberate pattern. The center eye first, then the outer ones, then the upper 2, a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. She was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling with effort, and one hand gripped the bed rail while the other rested on her swollen abdomen. She looked at me, all 5 eyes focusing with an intensity that made me feel suddenly very seen, very measured. "You are the surgeon," she said. Her voice was soft, with an accent I couldn't place. Not European, not Asian, not anything I recognized. "Dr. Mike," I confirmed, moving closer to the bed. "I understand you're in labor." She nodded and a small sound escaped her lips, something between a gasp and a hum. "The contractions are close now," she said. "Every 2 minutes. The pain is considerable." I glanced at the monitor beside her bed. The fetal heart rate was displayed there, a steady rhythm between 120 and 130, normal range. But the waveform had a slightly different quality than I was used to, a double peak where I'd expect a single one. "I need to examine you," I said gently, "to see how far along you are. Is that all right?" She nodded again, and I helped her shift position, her body moving with a fluid grace despite the obvious discomfort. As I performed the exam, I kept my expression neutral, professional, even as my mind raced to process what I was finding. The cervix was fully dilated, 10 centimeters, but the presentation was wrong. Instead of the smooth, round firmness of a fetal head, I felt something more complex. Multiple surfaces, irregular angles, and a texture that was firm but not quite bone-like. I withdrew my hand carefully and met her gaze. All 5 eyes were watching me with what I can only describe as patient understanding. Your baby is in a difficult position, I told her. I don't think vaginal delivery is going to be safe. I'm recommending a cesarean section. She closed her eyes, all 5 of them, in that same sequential pattern. I had hoped, she said quietly, to deliver naturally, but I trust your judgment.
You've had experience with complicated births.
I do, I said, though I didn't add that this was unlike anything I'd encountered before.
I'll need to prep the operating room.
We'll move quickly. She reached out then and touched my hand. Her fingers were long, elegant, and cool to the touch.
Thank you for not being afraid.
She said. I smiled, though my heart was beating faster than usual. I'm here to help, I said. Both of you. Within 20 minutes, we had her in OR3, the main surgical suite on the obstetrics floor. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Patel, had arrived and was setting up his equipment, his movements smooth and practiced. He caught my eye as I scrubbed in at the sink outside the room, and I saw the question there. She's anatomically different, I said quietly, but the principles are the same. We need to deliver this baby safely. He nodded. Spinal block or general? Let's try spinal first, I said, if she's comfortable with that. She had agreed and now lay on the operating table, her body draped in sterile blue sheets, only her abdomen exposed. The skin there had the same silvery quality, smooth and flawless, with no visible stretch marks despite the obvious term pregnancy. The scrub nurse, Maria, handed me the betadine solution, and I began painting the surgical site in broad, sweeping circles. The antiseptic left amber streaks across that pale skin. My patient watched me, her upper 2 eyes tracking my movements while the lower 3 seemed to be focused inward, perhaps managing the pain or preparing herself mentally for what was to come. You'll feel pressure, I told her, but no pain. The spinal block is working well. She hummed that melodic sound again, and I took it as acknowledgement. I picked up the scalpel, feeling its familiar weight in my hand. The OR was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitors and the whisper of the ventilation system. I positioned the blade just above the pubic bone and made my first incision. The skin parted cleanly under the scalpel, revealing subcutaneous tissue that was more cream-colored than the yellow I was used to. I worked carefully, layer by layer, cutting through fascia, separating muscle, my movements deliberate and controlled. The anatomy was similar enough to human that I could navigate by instinct, but different enough that I had to pay close attention. The muscles had a slightly different grain to them, and the blood, when it welled up in the surgical field, had a faint bluish tinge. I'll need more suction, I said quietly, and Maria adjusted her position. The suction catheter hissed as it cleared the field, and I continued deeper. The uterus came into view, distended and taut, its surface rippling with contractions even now. I could see the baby moving inside, shifting against the constraints of the wall, making the uterine incision, I announced, and cut carefully through the muscular wall. The blade sank through the layers, and then suddenly the membranes were visible, translucent and shimmering. I used scissors to extend the incision, and then reached inside, my hand sliding into the warm cavity of the uterus. What I felt made me pause for just a moment. The baby's head, but not shaped the way I expected. More complex, with sections that moved independently under my touch. I adjusted my grip, finding purchase, and began to ease the infant out. Come on, I murmured. Let's get you into the world. The head emerged slowly, and I saw that the face, if you could call it that, had the same 5-eye configuration as the mother. The eyes were closed, the skin even paler, almost translucent. I supported the head carefully and delivered the shoulders, first one, then the other, and then the body slid out in a rush of fluid that splashed across my gown. The baby let out a sound. Not a cry exactly, something higher pitched, warbling. I held the infant up, examining quickly. 10 fingers, 10 toes, all limbs moving. The umbilical cord pulsed with that same blue-tinged blood. Healthy baby girl, I announced, and heard the mother make a sound of relief behind the drapes. Maria was ready with blankets, and I placed the infant in her arms after clamping and cutting the cord. The baby continued that unusual crying, a sound like wind chimes in a breeze. Now came the careful work of closing. I delivered the placenta, which had an odd geometric pattern to its surface, almost fractal in its complexity. I placed it in a specimen basin for examination later, though I suspected no earthly pathology lab would quite know what to make of it. I began to close the uterine incision, using a running stitch that would hold the layers together securely. My hands moved in the familiar rhythm of suturing, pulling tissue together, ensuring hemostasis. The uterine muscle contracted well under my touch, a good sign. Dr. Patel called out vital signs from his position at the head of the table. Blood pressure steady at 110/70, heart rate 65. She's tolerating the procedure well. I nodded, focusing on my work. The uterine incision closed with neat, even stitches. I irrigated the cavity with warm saline, checking for any bleeding vessels, finding none. The tissue looked healthy, already beginning the process of healing. Layer by layer, I closed the abdomen, peritoneum, fascia, muscle, subcutaneous tissue, and finally skin. Each layer required attention, precision, respect for the tissue's integrity. The fascia came together with interrupted sutures, strong and secure. I tied each knot carefully, testing the tension. The skin closure was the final step. I used a subcuticular stitch, running just under the surface of that silvery skin, pulling the edges together in a fine line that would heal almost invisibly. My fingers worked with practiced efficiency, even as part of my mind marveled at what I was doing, performing surgery on a being whose very existence challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. "We're done," I announced finally, stepping back from the table. Total surgical time was 38 minutes. Fast for a cesarean. But then again, I'd been doing this for years. My hands knew the steps even when my mind struggled to process the context. The mother was already being moved to recovery, the baby bundled in her arms, still making that chiming sound. I stripped off my gloves and gown, disposing of them in the biohazard container. My scrubs underneath were damp with sweat despite the cool temperature in the OR. Dr. Patel caught my eye as he finished his paperwork. "That was different," he said mildly. "That's one word for it," I replied. In recovery, I checked on my patient one final time before heading home. She was awake and alert, all 5 eyes open now, focused on the infant at her breast. The baby was nursing, apparently finding the process instinctive despite the obvious differences in anatomy. I approached the bedside, and the mother looked up at me. "Thank you," she said simply. Her voice held a weight of gratitude that transcended language. "You're welcome," I said. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted, "but well. The pain is manageable. The baby is perfect." I smiled, looking down at the infant. "She certainly seems healthy. Have you chosen a name?" The mother's eyes shifted colors slightly, the irises darkening. "In my language, it translates roughly to first light," she said. "It is traditional for children born in the deep night." "First light," I repeated. "It's beautiful." The baby made that chiming sound again, and the mother hummed in response. A lullaby, perhaps, in a language I would never learn. I did my final checks. Vital signs stable. Incision dry and intact. Fundus firm. All the standard postpartum assessments, even if the patient was anything but standard. "I'll see you in the morning for rounds," I told her. "If you need anything before then, the nurses will call me." She nodded and I left the room quietly. The hospital corridor was empty. The floor quiet again. I walked back to the attending lounge, my mind replaying the case over and over. The feel of that unusual anatomy under my hands. The color of the blood. The sound of the baby's cry. In my office, I sat down to write my operative note. The computer screen glowed in the darkness. I started typing, using the standard format. Preoperative diagnosis. Term pregnancy with abnormal fetal lie. Procedure, primary cesarean section. But then I paused. How did you document something like this? What words could possibly capture what had just happened? I thought about calling administration, reporting the case, seeking guidance. But something stopped me. The trust in the mother's eyes when she'd asked me not to be afraid. The vulnerability of any woman in labor, regardless of her origin. In the end, I wrote a straightforward note. No mention of 5 eyes or silver skin or blood that ran blue, just the facts of the surgery itself. Incision type, layers closed, estimated blood loss, mother and infant stable. The rest would remain between me and that quiet room, between me and the falling snow outside. I saved the note and shut down the computer. My shift was officially over, though it was now past 2 in the morning. I gathered my things, my coat, my empty coffee mug, my car keys. The drive home was peaceful. The roads were nearly empty, the snow still falling in soft, hypnotic swirls through my headlights. I thought about my patient, about First Light, about the impossibility of what I'd just been part of. At home, I showered, letting the hot water wash away the last of the OR, the smell of betadine, the tension in my shoulders. I stood there for a long time, eyes closed, feeling the steam rise around me. When I finally climbed into bed, my mind was still turning over the details. But underneath the wonder, underneath the questions I couldn't answer, there was something else. A deep satisfaction. Because at its core, the case had been simple: a mother in distress, a baby that needed to be delivered safely. And I had done my job. The how and the why, the strange and the unexplainable, those were secondary to the fundamental truth. I was a surgeon. I helped bring new life into the world, and tonight, that world had been a little larger, a little stranger, and infinitely more interesting than I had thought possible. The snow continued to fall outside my window as I drifted toward sleep. And somewhere across town, in a recovery room lit by monitors and starlight, a mother held her newborn close and sang songs in a language that had traveled further than I could imagine. I returned to the hospital the next morning with the winter sun just breaking over the horizon, turning the snow-covered parking lot into a field of diamonds. My breath formed clouds in the cold air as I walked from my car to the entrance. Inside, the hospital was coming alive with the change of shift. Nurses exchanging reports, patients beginning to wake, the familiar rhythm of another day. I made my rounds on the postpartum floor, checking on my other patients first. A straightforward repeat cesarean from 2 days ago, healing well. A young woman who delivered her first baby vaginally, no complications. Standard postpartum care, vital signs, incision checks, answering questions about breastfeeding and pain management. And then I came to room 4. I knocked softly and entered to find my patient sitting up in bed, looking remarkably well for someone less than 12 hours post-op. First Light was sleeping in a bassinet beside her, wrapped in standard hospital blankets that seemed somehow inadequate for a baby so unusual. "Good morning," I said quietly, not wanting to wake the infant. "How did you rest?" "Better than expected," she replied. Her 5 eyes were clear and bright, no sign of the exhaustion I'd seen the night before. "Your pain medication is effective." "I'm grateful." I performed my examination, palpating her abdomen, checking the incision. Everything looked perfect. The skin was already beginning to knit together, the edges aligned precisely. No signs of infection or complications. "You're healing remarkably well," I observed. She smiled, a gesture that translated perfectly despite all our differences. "My people heal quickly," she said. "It is one of our adaptations." I nodded, making notes on my tablet. "And First Light, how is she doing?" "Thriving," the mother said, her voice filled with warmth. "She feeds well, sleeps peacefully. She is stronger than I dared hope." As if on cue, the baby stirred, making that chiming sound. The mother reached down and lifted her from the bassinet with practiced ease, cradling her close. I watched as First Light opened her eyes, all 5 of them, focusing on her mother's face with an intensity that seemed remarkable for a newborn. "When will we be able to leave?" the mother asked. "I'd like to get home as soon as possible." I considered this. Normally I'd keep a cesarean patient for at least 48 hours. But everything about this case was abnormal, and something told me that keeping them here longer than necessary might raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer. "If you continue to do this well," I said carefully, "I think we could discharge you this evening. 24 hours post-op. But you'll need to promise me you'll rest at home. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity. The incision needs time to heal, even if it's healing faster than I'm used to." "I promise," she said solemnly. "I have help waiting for me." I didn't ask what kind of help. I had a feeling I didn't want to know. Instead, I went over the discharge instructions, the signs of infection to watch for, when to seek medical attention. She listened carefully, nodding at appropriate moments. Before I left, I paused at the door. The mother looked up at me, all 5 eyes gentle. "I wanted to ask," I said slowly, "about last night, about who you are, where you're from." She was quiet for a moment, swaying slightly to soothe the baby. "Would knowing change what you did for us?" she asked. "Would it have made you a better surgeon or a worse one?" I thought about this. "No," I admitted. "I suppose it wouldn't." "Then perhaps," she said kindly, "some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. What matters is that you helped us when we needed it most. You treated us with dignity and skill. That is the only story that needs to be told." I found myself nodding, accepting this. "You're right," I said. "I hope you and First Light have a beautiful life together, wherever that may be." "Thank you, Dr. Mike," she said. "You have a gift, not just in your hands, but in your heart. You do not turn away from the unknown." That is rarer than you might think. I left the room feeling oddly moved. The rest of my day proceeded normally. More rounds, scheduled surgery, paperwork, meetings. But that case stayed with me, a bright thread running through the ordinary fabric of hospital life. That evening, as promised, I discharged my patient. I signed the papers, provided the prescriptions for pain medication, and watched as she was wheeled to the exit, first light in her arms. A dark vehicle was waiting at the curb, and I caught a glimpse of figures inside. But I didn't look too closely. Some mysteries, as she'd said, were meant to remain mysteries. The snow had stopped, leaving the world clean and white. I stood at the hospital entrance, watching the vehicle pull away, its taillights disappearing into the winter evening, and then I turned and went back inside, back to the warmth and light, back to the work that filled my days. In the weeks that followed, I thought about that case often, late at night when the hospital was quiet, or during long surgeries when my hands moved through familiar motions. My mind would wander back to that operating room, to that moment when I'd held an impossible life in my hands. I never saw my patient again. There was no follow-up appointment, no post-operative check. It was as if she in first light had simply vanished back into whatever corner of existence they'd emerged from. But sometimes, on winter nights when the snow is falling, I find myself looking up at the sky, wondering if somewhere out there, a young one with 5 eyes is growing up healthy and strong because of what happened in this hospital on one extraordinary night. And I think about the fundamental truth of medicine, that underneath all our differences, we all share certain universal experiences: birth and death, pain and healing, fear and hope. The work I do happens in the space between these extremes, in operating rooms and delivery suites, in moments of crisis and decision. And sometimes, very rarely, the universe opens a door and shows you that your work matters in ways you never imagined, that the skills you've honed, the training you've endured, the sleep you've lost, all of it serves a purpose larger than you knew. I'm a surgeon. I bring new life into the world. And on one winter night, the world I served was bigger than I'd ever dreamed. That's enough for me. That's everything. The case remains in my memory like a jewel, rare and precious. I've never spoken of it to colleagues, never written about it in medical journals. How could I? Who would believe me? And more importantly, what would be gained by sharing? Instead, I carry it quietly, a reminder that the universe is vast and strange and full of wonders, that compassion and skill can bridge any divide, that the oath I took to do no harm extends further than I ever imagined. On my office wall, among the diplomas and certifications, I've hung a small picture, a night sky full of stars, infinite and beautiful. Most people who see it think it's just decoration, a pretty image to break up the medical texts and anatomical charts. But I know differently. Every time I look at it, I remember 5 eyes watching me with trust. Remember the weight of an impossible infant in my hands. Remember the moment when the universe whispered, "You are exactly where you need to be." And that's the real story. Not the strangeness or the mystery, but the simple truth that we're all healers and patients, all vulnerable and strong, all connected by threads we can barely perceive. The snow falls, the world turns, and in hospitals everywhere, under fluorescent lights and to the steady beeping of monitors, life continues its eternal dance. I'm grateful to be part of it. Every case, ordinary or extraordinary, is a privilege. Every patient, human or otherwise, deserves our best effort. And every moment in the OR is a chance to remember why we chose this work: to help, to heal, to stand in the gap between crisis and resolution and guide people through. That winter taught me something I'll never forget: that the scope of our compassion is limited only by our willingness to see, that fear is just the threshold we cross to reach understanding, that the most profound moments in medicine aren't always the ones that make it into textbooks. Sometimes they're the quiet ones: a mother holding her newborn, a surgeon washing his hands, a hospital room lit by monitors and starlight. These are the moments that define us. The operating room has been my home for many years now. I've stood at thousands of tables, made thousands of incisions, held thousands of lives in my hands. Each one matters. Each one is a story. But that winter case, that impossible cesarean section, holds a special place in my memory. Not because it was strange, though it certainly was, but because it reminded me of something fundamental. We're not as different as we might think. Pain is universal. Love is universal. The bond between a mother and child transcends biology. And the drive to protect new life, to give it every chance to thrive, that's written into the very fabric of existence. I see it in every delivery, in every anxious parent waiting for news, in every first cry that fills an operating room. We're all part of this pattern, this great, complex, beautiful pattern of life renewing itself. And I'm honored to play my small part. The years have passed since that winter night. I've performed hundreds more cesarean sections, delivered hundreds more babies, each one unique, each one precious. But on quiet nights, when the snow falls and the hospital settles into its late shift rhythm, I sometimes find myself thinking about First Light. Is she walking now? Running, learning to speak in that melodic language? Does she know, on some level, about the night she was born? About the surgical team that welcomed her into this world with gentle hands and open hearts? I'll never know the answers. And perhaps that's as it should be. The universe keeps its secrets, but it also offers gifts, moments of connection that transcend understanding, opportunities to serve in ways we never expected. That night, the universe offered me such a gift. And I'm grateful I was ready to receive it, that I didn't turn away from the unknown, that I trusted my training, my instincts, and my fundamental belief that every life deserves protection. This is the work. This is the calling. Whether my patients have 2 eyes or 5, whether their blood runs red or blue, whether they come from across town or across the cosmos, the mission remains the same. Do no harm. Provide comfort. Use your skills to their fullest. And remember that you're part of something larger than yourself, something ancient and ongoing and infinitely valuable. The preservation of life, the celebration of new beginnings, the quiet heroism of showing up day after day to serve those who need you most. I'll be back in the OR tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days to come. Each one brings new challenges, new stories, new opportunities to make a difference. And I'll meet them all with the same commitment I brought to that winter case, with skill and compassion and a willingness to embrace the extraordinary within the ordinary. Because that's what medicine is, at its best, a meeting place between science and humanity, between knowledge and intuition, between what we know and what we're willing to learn. And sometimes, very rarely, it's a doorway to something beyond our understanding. A reminder that we live in a universe more vast and wonderful than we can imagine. A universe where a surgeon can deliver an alien child on a snowy winter night, and then go home and sleep peacefully, knowing he did his job. If you made it to the end of this story, congratulations. You're part of the rare few who journey all the way through. Most people drift off somewhere along the way, which is exactly what these stories are designed for. But if you're still here, still awake, still thinking about First Light and her mother and that impossible night, then I hope you'll join me for the next surgery. Because who knows what might come through those OR doors next. Maybe it'll be you on the table, though I hope not. Drop a comment below and let me know you made it to the end. Tell me what you thought. Tell me if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain. Tell me if you believe. And when you're ready for sleep, let this story carry you there. Let it remind you that the world is bigger and stranger and more beautiful than we know. That compassion crosses every boundary. That skill and care can bridge any divide. Rest well, sleep deeply, and I'll see you in the next surgery. Dr. Mike, signing off.